It's time to rethink that assumption right now. One simple mistake, something drivers all across the United States do every single day, is directly linked to tire blowouts, rollovers, loss of control at highway speeds, and even serious suspension damage. And here's the most disturbing part. Over 90% of drivers make this mistake without realizing it. Tire shops and service centers see the consequences weekly. Mechanics warn about it constantly. Yet most people keep repeating the same dangerous habit because almost nobody ever explains the real physics behind tire pressure and what actually happens inside the tire the exact moment you hook up an air hose. By the end of this video, you'll understand one thing you should never do when inflating your tires. A mistake that weakens steel belts, compromises high-speed stability, and turns a tire that looks perfectly fine into a silent time bomb. Before we go on, subscribe to AutoJ World. This channel is about real mechanics, real safety, and real information that protects your car and your wallet. A small detail can preserve your tires, your vehicle, and in many cases, your life. Now let's expose the truth about tire pressure that almost nobody in the US ever talks about. Number 1. The hidden risk most drivers are never taught. Everyone knows tires need the correct pressure, but almost nobody understands what's actually happening inside them when that pressure is wrong. And that lack of understanding explains why so many blowouts, tread separations, and serious highway accidents happen across America every day. The danger doesn't start dramatically. It doesn't require extreme speed or a massive pothole. It starts quietly, long before the tire fails, because of a simple misunderstanding of how pressure really works. Most drivers treat pressure like a rough number. As long as it's close enough, they assume everything is fine. In reality, tire pressure controls nearly everything. How much the tire flexes, how much heat it generates, how the steel belts behave, and how much rubber actually contacts the road. When pressure is off, even by a few PSI, the entire internal behavior of the tire changes. A slightly underinflated tire flexes excessively. That flex creates heat. Heat weakens rubber, degrades internal layers, and stresses the steel belts that support the tread. On the other hand, an overinflated tire becomes rigid, loses contact patch, and leaves the sidewalls far more vulnerable to impacts. In both cases, damage starts internally, long before the driver sees any warning signs. This invisible internal stress is responsible for far more tire failures than nails or road debris. And it all begins with a false idea that being a little off doesn't matter. Number 2. Why tire pressure is never accurate after driving. Most American drivers don't realize that the moment a vehicle starts moving, even for a short trip, tire pressure readings are no longer true. It doesn't matter if it's a quick grocery run, a school drop-off, or a short highway merge. As soon as the tire rotates, friction with the road, pavement temperature, braking, cornering, and even sunlight cause the air inside to expand rapidly. This expansion completely distorts the pressure reading. A tire can easily gain 5 to 10 PSI just from heat. When you check pressure right after driving, that warm air lies to you. The gauge might show 30 PSI when the correct cold pressure should actually be 35. Because heat masks the real value, the driver assumes the tire is low and adds air. That's where the problem starts. Adding air to a hot tire means you're overinflating it without knowing it. Once the car is parked and the tire cools down, that extra air pushes the pressure well beyond safe limits. What seemed like a harmless adjustment turns into a stiff, overinflated tire with less grip, harsher impacts, reduced shock absorption, and a much higher risk of failure at highway speed. Correct pressure only exists when the tire is cold. If the tire feels warm to the touch, the reading is already wrong, and adding air in that condition is one of the fastest ways to turn a healthy tire into a serious hazard. Number 3. The cold tire rule, the foundation of safe inflation. There is a simple maintenance rule that's universally accepted in the automotive world and almost universally ignored by drivers. Tires must only be checked and inflated when they are completely cold. Not warm, not after a short drive, not 10 minutes after stopping at a gas station. Cold means the vehicle has been parked for at least 3 hours, long enough for the internal air to return to its true resting pressure. This is the only moment when the reading reflects exactly what the manufacturer engineered. Automakers specify tire pressures assuming cold conditions because it's the only reliable baseline before normal pressure increases from heat, load, and friction. Ignoring this rule is one of the main causes of accidental overinflation. When you measure a hot tire, pressure appears lower than it should be, so you add air. Later, as the tire cools, pressure rises on its own to dangerous levels. That's why engineers, service manuals, and professional training all repeat the same warning: never trust a hot tire reading. Tires only tell the truth when they're cold. Following this rule alone drastically reduces the risk of blowouts, belt separation, and structural failure. Number 4. Why overinflated tires are more common than underinflated ones. Most drivers worry about running low pressure, but the reality is very different. Overinflation is far more common and far more dangerous than people realize. It usually doesn't happen because someone intentionally adds too much air, but because they rely on measurements taken at the wrong time or inaccurate gas station gauges. The result is a tire that's rigid, stressed, and fragile. The logic is straightforward. A driver checks pressure after driving. The tire is hot, air expanded, and the reading is misleading. Thinking they're correcting a small drop, they add a few PSI. Once the tire cools, pressure ends up 4, 6, sometimes even 8 PSI above the recommended value. Overinflated tires don't look dangerous, but internally they're under constant strain. The contact patch shrinks, reducing traction, especially on wet pavement. The sidewalls harden and lose their ability to absorb impact. Too much air turns a safety component into a rigid, brittle structure. And most of the time, the driver has no idea it happened. Number 5. What really happens inside an overinflated tire? The internal failure chain. From the outside, an overinflated tire can look perfectly normal. It may even feel firm and solid. Inside, however, a dangerous sequence begins as soon as pressure exceeds the limits the tire was engineered to handle. These failures don't happen instantly. They build slowly, silently, with no visible warning. The first issue is reduced contact with the road. Less rubber touching the pavement concentrates heat into smaller areas, especially at highway speeds. And heat is a tire's worst enemy. It dries out rubber, weakens internal bonding agents, and overloads every structural layer. Next, the steel belts begin to suffer. They are not designed to stretch. Excess pressure is completely invisible from the outside. Over time, air migrates into these weakened zones and a bubble forms, either on the sidewall or the tread. At that point, the tire is already finished. There is no safe repair. Under speed, heat, load, and centrifugal force, the tire reaches its breaking point. A separated belt does not fail gradually. It fails violently, destroying the tire in fractions of a second. And all of it can start with just a few PSI more than recommended. Number 6. Ignoring the valve core and the valve cap. There's a nearly invisible detail that most drivers never think about, yet it's one of the most common causes of slow tire pressure loss. Inside the valve stem there's a small spring-loaded pin called the valve core. Its only job is to seal the air inside the tire. If that core is loose, dirty, or corroded, air begins to escape slowly, even if the gauge shows correct pressure right after inflation. And that plastic cap almost everyone loses or ignores isn't there for looks. It protects the valve core from dust, water, road salt, and debris. When contaminants get inside, they corrode the internal spring, and the problem shows up days later as uneven tire pressures with no obvious reason. According to data from Continental engineers, valve core failures account for roughly 12% of pressure loss cases where no puncture is found. That's why every time you inflate your tires, you should check that the valve core is properly tightened. There's a simple tool that costs almost nothing and fixes this in seconds. And never leave the cap off. Ideally use caps with internal seals or metal caps. It's a small detail, but it's exactly the standard followed by professional tire shops. Number 7. Applying tire shine right after inflating. This mistake is dangerous because it looks completely harmless. Many people inflate their tires and immediately apply tire shine or dressing to make them look good. The problem is that most mass-market tire shine products contain petroleum-based solvents or aggressive silicone compounds. When applied to warm tires, which is very common right after inflation or driving, these chemicals accelerate rubber drying. Heat triggers a chemical reaction that slowly reduces sidewall elasticity, creating microscopic cracks that are almost impossible to see. With repeated use, these micro cracks can evolve into structural weaknesses and even blowouts. Professional detailers and premium product manufacturers recommend applying tire dressing only when the tires are completely cold, preferably hours later, and using water-based products with UV protection. That way you preserve the appearance without compromising the tire's structure. Number 8. Ignoring temperature and altitude changes. Here's a fact that surprises even experienced drivers. Tire pressure changes by about 1 PSI for every 10 degrees Fahrenheit of temperature change. That means if you inflate your tires on a hot 85-degree day and overnight temperatures drop to around 50 degrees, your tires can lose 3 to 4 PSI without anything being wrong. In mountainous regions or trips involving significant elevation changes, the effect becomes even more complex. As altitude increases, external atmospheric pressure drops, which makes the relative pressure inside the tire increase. A tire properly inflated at sea level can appear overinflated at higher elevations, confusing the driver. Then, when descending again without adjustment, the tire ends up operating under excessive stress. Goodyear engineers recommend checking tire pressure under similar temperature and altitude conditions whenever possible. On long trips, the safest approach is to recheck and adjust pressure at your destination, especially if climate or elevation changes significantly. Tires aren't static. They expand and contract with their environment. Number 9. Failing to reset the TPMS after inflating. Most modern vehicles sold in the U.S. are equipped with a tire pressure monitoring system, or TPMS. It's designed to warn you when pressure drops, but there's a common mistake many drivers make. They inflate the tires and then just drive away without resetting the system. When that happens, the TPMS continues using old pressure values as its baseline. As a result, when a tire actually loses pressure later, the warning may not activate in time. Safety data shows that a significant number of TPMS-related incidents happen because the system wasn't recalibrated after maintenance or inflation. The correct procedure is simple. After inflating, turn the ignition on without starting the engine and look for the TPMS reset or relearn option in the dashboard menu or infotainment system. Confirm the process, then drive at a steady speed for several minutes so the system can store the new values. This small step keeps the system reliable and prevents you from driving on dangerously low tires without warning. Number 10. Forgetting the spare tire. This is one of the most common and most embarrassing mistakes. Drivers take care of the 4 main tires and completely ignore the spare. Roadside assistance professionals report that a large percentage of flat tire calls end with the discovery that the spare is also flat. Tires naturally lose pressure over time, about 1 PSI per month. If the spare hasn't been checked in a year, it's very likely unsafe to use. In an emergency, that can lead to immediate failure or even wheel damage. Every time you check or inflate your tires, take a few extra seconds to check the spare. On temporary spares, often called donut spares, the required pressure is much higher, usually around 60 psi, but the exact value is listed in the owner's manual or on the tire itself. This simple habit can save you from being stranded on the roadside. Number 11. Mixing up front and rear tire pressures. This is a technical detail that even some service stations get wrong. Front and rear tire pressures are not always the same. On vehicles with more weight over the front axle, such as SUVs, pickup trucks, and front-heavy sedans, the front tires handle more load, braking force, and steering stress. That's why the door jamb label may specify something like 36 psi in the front and 33 psi in the rear. When all 4 tires are inflated to the same pressure, the vehicle's balance changes. This can cause understeer in corners, uneven tread wear, and reduced braking efficiency, especially on wet roads. These numbers are not suggestions. They're part of the fine-tuning between suspension geometry, braking systems, stability control, and weight distribution. Always check the vehicle placard or owner's manual before inflating. One number does not fit all 4 tires. Number 12. Inflating too fast and the hidden danger behind it. This is an almost invisible